Shalom and welcome to the Middle East Report. We have a very special and exclusive interview today with Liz Hirsh Naftali, who is the great aunt of Abigail Mor Edan, who was kidnapped by Hamas on that evil day, October the 7th. Liz, it's an absolute pleasure, can I say, and an honour to have you here today on the Middle East Report, and thank you for being here. And it's always very special to interview a family member of one of the Israeli hostages. In this case, your beautiful relative Abigail, who was kidnapped by Hamas on that evil day. But before we discuss Abigail and the story of October the 7th, can you share with us your Jewish story? Because you're from Los Angeles, that incredible city with that dynamic Jewish community there. So can you share with us your Jewish story?
Yeah, sure. So I'm from Los Angeles, born and raised, and part of the Jewish community. My father was the president of the Jewish Federation in Los Angeles. My mother spent a good portion of years helping Soviet Jews be freed from the former Soviet Union. But for us, it was always about tzedakah, giving back. We were very involved in Jewish family services, which was making sure that Jews and everybody in LA that needed a free meal or a place for medical and psychological support could go. So for me, growing up, that was just part of who I was. And then I got married and I moved to Israel. And I lived in Israel for a lot of years full-time and then off and on, and raised 5 kids there. And so for me, Israel was a second home. Being Jewish is something I am very proud of. I'm a proud Zionist. And where I am today is I want people to know about my history, but really know about this recent history and the truth of what did happen on October 7th. So thank you for having me.
No, it's a pleasure. And to take you back, share with us what life was like living in Israel, because it's a big step to make Aliyah, particularly coming from California and LA, to then make Aliyah and to live in Israel and and a wonderful place to have a family. Share with us where you lived in Israel, and how did you adapt to the culture from the culture of California to that of Eretz Israel?
So when I moved there, I had little kids, and I had to learn Hebrew because I didn't really know it before, functioning, speaking the language. So I always said, as long as my kids, whatever age they were, I had to know Hebrew at that level. So for me, it was really about trying to just be fully immersed. And it was very different than LA, and it was a very different experience raising my children than my friends who were back in Los Angeles. But I looked at it as an adventure. And for me, the one thing I had was this big family that I inherited through marriage, this most amazing, beautiful family. And they represented immigrants from Iraq, and they represented family that came from America and family that came from Eastern Europe. So I had this very diverse family, but it was exactly really what represented Israel at that time. And I lived there in the 90s full time, and I just watched this country grow, and so many things happen. It went from like where you could only have hummus and pita to like food from all over the world, and the best food. And the one thing that I always could say was that while sometimes the Israelis would like be a little gruff, and I write about it, is like they'd say no first. The next thing they would do is say, okay, how can I help you? And then they would embrace you. And I think to this day that has been something that for me has been very special. I never fully made Aliyah. I have 2 kids that have. I always lived back and forth. But the only difference is that I didn't become a full citizen, but in terms of my love for the country and my passion for this place and the people, it's there. And I will just add this last piece, which is my children bilingual, my children binational. And we spent a lot of time with our family. And I know we're going to talk about what it was like there, but we spent a lot of time on these kibbutzes. We spent a lot of time along the border with Gaza. So for me, what happened on October 7th was not only for my family, but a place that I had spent so much of my time when I lived in Israel.
Absolutely, and those kibbutzes in the south of Israel before October the 7th are beautiful, beautiful communities and beautiful people. But can you share with us, Liz, what it felt like to be home in Israel under a Jewish state? Because there is only one Jewish state in the world, and that is the modern state of Israel. And so from going from California to Israel, what did it feel like, and essentially being back home and being under a kind of Jewish state where Jewish tradition, where Jewish law, where Jewish festivals are part of the norm?
It was remarkable. And it is to this day. I still go back and forth. And one of the things that for me, it's like you see on like Shabbat, like the tradition. People may not be very religious in the sense that they go to a shul or a synagogue, but they get together with their family and they do the blessings. They do the blessings of challah, they do the blessings of wine, they do the blessings of family, and people come together. And I think that, for me, one of the things that was always very special were the holidays, was the time together with family. And it was just one of those things that, like in LA, people are always running, and it didn't always feel like people stopped on one certain day of the week or on a certain holiday, other than maybe the 2 or 3 national holidays in America. But in Israel, whether it was celebrating the grains, celebrating milk, celebrating freedom, celebrating the destruction of the temples, there was always something that pulled people together. And there was just a sense of pride, and there still is a sense of pride. The Israeli people, the Jewish people, we understand that this land is very special. It's been the Jewish homeland for thousands of years, but it has continued in the modern times to be this thriving, incredible, dynamic, and very interesting, because it's so many different people from all over the world and so many different levels of religion and different degrees. But the one thing that connects everybody is this love of this nation.
Yeah, which is incredible. Mm-hmm. Just share with us, as we're talking about October the 7th, but share with us before then of the incredible bond that there is between the United States and Israel. And we've seen that only in the past couple of weeks, where we've seen the Israeli Prime Minister being the first world leader to be invited to meet with newly elected Donald Trump in the White House, that special relationship. Just share with us as an American, and also can I say as an Israeli, how important that special relationship is, particularly for our viewers watching from the UK.
As I grew up, I understood the special relationship. I understood the importance of Israel for the American people, but I understood the importance for Israel of the American support. But one of the things that I've learned from this last 16 months since October is the importance of keeping Israel for all Americans, and I speak as an American. But I believe that one of the things that's so important has been the work that I have done being an advocate for the hostages, having the Democrats and the Republicans, and being able to go and seek advice, seek support, get them to understand the stories of October 7th. And that has been something that we have seen bipartisan support for. And that has been also the history of Israel, which has been the importance of bipartisan support in America for Israel. And we have had that. We can always talk about people who are outliers who don't love Israel, but the majority of the people that are in the US government, in the Congress, really have been the most outstanding advocates and supporters and truth tellers of the horrors of October 7th. And they have spoken up. You can go to these leaders' Instagram, you can see their congressional statements, you can see what they've spoken about, you can see the amount of hostage families they've met with. That tells you this incredible bond. And I'm going to go back to before with President Biden for 4 years and now with President Trump. The issue of the hostages has been out there and in front. And these leaders have talked about the importance of getting the hostages home, supporting Israel. And I can speak for the 4 years of President Biden's administration and then the transition with President Trump and his group and his team until this moment that I'm sitting here with you. And the one thing that I am very proud of is the American love and support and embrace of Israel, the Israeli people, and Israel's right to exist.
Absolutely, and that's why I believe America has been so blessed as a nation, primarily because if you look at American history, it was President Washington who integrated the Jewish community during independence, and America's been the only country where the Jewish people have been emancipated from the very beginning of the history of the United States. And you see that cultural trend through Hollywood, through American TV series, even Friends, of Christians and Jews, and that is that Judeo Christian heritage that America has. And this is why I believe America has been so blessed over the centuries, because of its treatment of the Jewish people who have flourished in that land, like you and your family have. But Liz, share with us where you were on that horrific day known as October the 7th, that changed your world, changed Israel, and also changed the world and the outlook for Jewish people around the world.
Yeah, and I'll add, and then I'll tell you, I will add humanity. Yeah. You know, it isn't a religious, it is beyond that. It goes to like our shared humanity and terror, religious-wise, ethnic, there's no room for it. So even taking what you said one step further, this is a humanitarian crisis, this attack on the people who were in Israel. And keep in mind, they were Jews, but they were Muslims, they were Christians, they were Buddhists, they were Hindu. They came from over 30 nations. These were people from all over Israel and people that had come to Israel to learn farming, to help people from Thailand, from Nepal, from Africa. And so when you talk about this, I want people, and this is my opportunity to tell people, this was a humanitarian crisis. This was an attack on all humans. This was an attack on all good people. And so I want to start with that really as a statement. I think it's important to set this correct.
Absolutely.
Which is like, I would hate for it to be in anyone's neighborhood. But if we do not stand up against what happened in Israel on October 7th, we allow others and people who are hateful as terrorist groups to attack others. And so for me, speaking with you and having this opportunity is a clear opportunity to sort of speak about the truth of that day from a holistic place. But for me, I had arrived the night before.
Wow.
It was Simchat Torah.
Yep.
I have a daughter who lives in Tel Aviv, who I was going to visit, and I went to bed, and I woke up on October 7th to sirens at 6:30 in the morning. And what I will say is, and you know this from visiting Israel, that sirens are something that people in Israel have gotten accustomed to. It's horrible. You hear a siren, and you run to whatever safe room there is. In my case, it was the hotel stairwell. So I'm running to the stairwell at 6:30, then go back to my room, and then keep going. And a few sirens later, I realized this wasn't a normal, oh, there's a siren, missiles are flying in, but they have been destroyed and life continues. And I started learning that something was happening along the border of Israel with Gaza. And as I told you, I spent a lot of years living in Israel and spending a lot of time on Kibbutz Kfar Aza, which is a community right along the border. And I called my sister-in-law who lived there. I called my niece who lived there. And think about it, we had spent all these holidays there. My kids grew up there. They loved it. They loved the green grass. They loved to run free. It was like a heaven. And no one answered my call. And I proceeded to call a sister-in-law in Tel Aviv. And I said to her, what's happened? What's going on? And the first thing she says to me in Hebrew is, that my niece Smadar, her husband Ro'i, and their baby 3-year-old Abigail were murdered that morning at 6:30 by Hamas terrorists. And that is how I started to learn not only about the attack for everybody, but how my family was affected and the terror and the horror that affected this beautiful young mother, Smadar, who I met first when she was like 4 years old. So that's where I was that morning. And I spent the day in a hotel room. No one could move, no one could leave. And the only people that were reporting at that moment to me through the family were my niece and her husband's 6- and 9-year-old who had witnessed the murders with their baby sister, Abigail, and were now locked in a cupboard in their home with a cell phone in the dark.
It's unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. I remember visiting Kibbutz Narim back in December of 2022, and this was part of the Israeli Prime Minister's office, and it was known as the Christian Media Summit. And so we met the leaders of the regional council, the Eshkol Regional Council there, and they showed us around Kibbutz Narim. And we met the leaders there, and we learned what happened when the rockets and missiles fire over the kibbutz. Beautiful kibbutz, pristine gardens, and such an amazing people. And they were so grateful that we actually paid them a visit. But I wanted the mic, and I said, no, you are thanking us for coming here. No, we need to thank you because you're on the front line. You are protecting not only Israel, but the world from this evil ideology that is Hamas. And sadly, so many of those who we met from that kibbutz are no longer with us. And when you see the kind of video footage of what happened on October the 7th, you recognise the roads, you recognise the kibbutzes, and then having visited kibbutz near Oz in end of January of last year, and you see the devastation. It's like the Holocaust, and it's so reminiscent of the actual Holocaust and the magnitude that this happened. But share with us the story of Abigail, because you've written this incredible book called Saving Abigail. Share with us Abigail's story of what happened on October the 7th.
Yeah, so on October 7th at 6:30, my niece Smadar heard the sirens, and her husband, who was a photojournalist, he went outside to take photos. He was a reporter for the news in the country, and he had done this many times where he had gone out to take pictures of the missiles, send them to the news for the country to see. But this morning, obviously, it was a terror attack. It wasn't a normal missile. But that morning, my niece had put her 3 kids, when the alarms started ringing, into their safe room. And keep in mind that in this part of the country, right along the border, people didn't have 5 minutes to run to a safe room. They had seconds. So she was putting them in. And as she was putting them in, Hamas terrorists who had come in, not only by breaking the fence, but also by paragliding in, they came into their home, and their home was a corner home. And Abigail and her brother and sister Amalia and Michael were being put in the safe room, and their mother was shot and murdered by Hamas terrorists. They ran outside, and their father, who realized this was a terror attack, picked up Abigail in his arms, and he started to run with Amalia and Michael by his side, and he was gunned down and murdered by terrorists. And he fell onto little Abigail, dead, and these 2 children ran home for safety. That's all they could do, run home and lock themselves in a cupboard. So at that moment, we understood that Abigail had been murdered with their father. In the meantime, Amalia and Michael spent 14 hours in this cupboard, waiting to be rescued. My niece and her husband, who lived across the kibbutz, they waited 29 hours. Nobody came to save them. Nobody from the IDF came. Nobody came, except for reservists who put on equipment and came from their homes from over the country, came down to protect. Many of them were killed because they didn't realize the level of ammunition and the grenades and what Hamas had come in with. They weren't prepared. They were mismanaged from the Israeli side. But 29 hours later, the army was able to finally get the kibbutz cleared enough to remove my niece and her husband and their 3 kids. Michael and Amalia were rescued in an operation, a special operation, 14 hours, because they were 2 little children alone. But it took like 3 days for them to actually clear the Hamas terrorists from the kibbutz. And then they looked around, and there was no Abigail. She was nowhere to be found. So what I talk about, and I write about it in this book called Saving Abigail, was that all of a sudden we had to figure out what had happened to Abigail. And Abigail had been miraculously not wounded when her father was killed. And she had crawled out and gone for safety. And miraculously, some family that she knew had actually opened the door. Because think about this. Everyone was locked in their safe rooms. They had WhatsApps. They were telling each other about the horrible people, the noise who was coming into their homes, the terrorists that were coming after them, their houses that were being burned. And here they were, and in this one home, this very brave man named Avichai Brodich, who was part of the kibbutz's security apparatus, was going out to protect the kibbutz, and he opened the door, and there was little Abigail, this 3-year-old covered in her father's blood. And he brought her inside, and he put her with his wife, Hagar, and their 3 children. And then he went to protect the kibbutz. And he never came back because he was injured. So it took us a few days to understand that Abigail had actually arrived in their home. And then we also learned that Hagar had been taken as a hostage with her 3 children. And we assumed at that moment that Abigail had been taken as well.
It's just beyond comprehension. What your family went through, and tell us what were your thoughts when you discovered that Abigail, beautiful Abigail, was taken by Hamas and taken back to that hellhole that is Gaza.
Yeah. You know, it was all of a sudden I came back to America the next day. People said, get out. You'll do better in America than staying here. So I left Israel. I saw my daughter, who I came to visit just for 30 minutes on the way to the airport. She's an Israeli. She was staying with her people. She was staying there to support the family. And I left. And I got to America and I started doing some press and telling people what had happened. People knew I was in Israel. That night, people were already calling me going, what's happening? So I was able to tell people. And so I left, but in these first few days, my story, which was the story we believed, which was that Smadar and her husband were killed, and so was baby Abigail, little 3-year-old, this little tiny child. When we realized a few days later that she had survived, there was this relief. Now, she was a hostage, and as you said, we didn't know what her conditions were, but she was a hostage. So I was like, okay, there's somebody to save. And I didn't know how to save her. But I then asked my cousin, my brother-in-law in Israel, and I said, just send me this picture. Send me a picture of this child. And I looked in the eyes of this child, and I said, I'm going to save you. Now, I had no idea how I was going to save her. I didn't know what I was doing. Nobody would know at this situation. But I looked at these eyes, and I said, I'm going to save you. My sister-in-law called me, how are we going to get her back from Israel? I'm like, yes, we're going to get her back. I believed it. I prayed for it. I manifested it. I didn't know at that moment. A few days later, this woman named Sophia from North Carolina calls me and says, I'm going to Washington, D.C. I'm advocating for Israel. There's a family from North Carolina of Keith Siegel. He was a 65-year-old neighbor of Abigail's, and his wife, Aviva, they were kidnapped. Will you come and tell Abigail's story? I said, yes. When? She said, tomorrow. Literally, we went to D.C., and I was with Keith's family, his sister and niece who lived in the States, myself and this beautiful woman named Sophia. And we went and we talked to congressional leaders, House and Senate in America, Democrats, Republicans, Jewish, Christian, everyone. And what I did was I took this picture, and I had hundreds of this picture copied, just like you see here. And I took this picture, and then I took the picture of the 246 hostages at that moment. We had already started to know who they were. Keep in mind, 1,200 people were murdered on October 7th at this moment. But the number's grown, but when we started to understand the severity of this, 246 people taken hostage, 35 of them under the age of 18. So I wanted people to see the faces of all the hostages, and I got the picture that came from Israel, and I would hand out not only Abigail's picture, but the picture of all the hostages. And this was before most of the families even could get themselves to Washington, D.C. These are people that were in shock. They were still in Israel. And what I did was I just kept telling the story with Keith's family. And what I understood was that if people could see that this was the face of a hostage, they could even understand more the grotesque, disgusting behavior of Hamas to these innocent. This child was in her pajamas. People were in their pajamas. These were people just like you and I, getting up in the morning, holiday morning, ready to have a nice day.
And can you share with our viewers what Abigail is like, her character? I mean, for a 3-year-old, I think she's already extraordinary. To experience what she's experienced, having her parents mowed down in cold blood by those Hamas terrorists, but using her initiative to run for help and just share with us what her character's like, because she's remarkable.
Yeah. So she's a beautiful, as you see, child, but she is full of energy. She is wise. She is always moving. She's very curious. And she's fearless, and she's resilient. And so I think that's a lot of what think about it. She crawled out from her father's body and went to get help. There were, on a day like this morning that took place on the 7th, there were about 650 people on the kibbutz. They were all hiding. Jews are not supposed to hide. These were Jewish people, the majority, all hiding from terrorists. And this child is with about 300 Hamas terrorists with guns and ammunition and with a goal to kill. And this child is running and finds her way to a neighbor who she knew. Her father was his best friend. So, like, that tells you who Abigail is.
Amazing.
But then, just for you to understand the story, for 51 days, this child was held with Hagar and her 3 children in a dark room. No food, 1 piece of pita bread a day, a little bit of water.
This is in the actual territory.
This is when they were in Gaza. They weren't in a tunnel, they were in a building, but in a darkened room, very small. Nothing was given to them for cleaning, and very little food. And they were to be silent. So this child who's full of energy, and when you see her, you'd say, oh, she's this beautiful, energetic, lovely child, was silenced with 3 other children for 51 days. And, you know, the other thing, and I say this so people understand the complexity of it, every night, everywhere around where they were, bombs were being dropped by the Israelis. So Abigail, this 3-year-old, was hearing bombs. And one night, and I write about it, a bomb destroyed the building they were in. They survived. A few of the people that were there that were also hostages were injured, and they had to be moved. But this was a war zone that was started by the terrorist attack of Hamas on October 7th. And then this child, who then was taken as hostage, was not only put in a dark room, but then was the victim of a war that was started and was living for 51 days with bombs dropping everywhere. Just to give you an understanding of what this child went through.
Just absolutely kind of remarkable. Share with us how you launched this incredible campaign to bring Abigail home, and share with us how doors opened in the corridors of power in Washington, D.C., both with the Senate, the Congress, and also with President Biden as well.
Yeah. Look, as I said, I got back to America right away, so I had a little bit of a head start. But one of the things that I learned very early on was that we had the hearts, the minds, and the passion from American leadership. So we had Dems, Republicans, as I've already said, very much focused. But in the months and years since then, they have continued to have visitors. They have continued to hear stories. They have continued to open their arms and their offices, and not just the leader, but their staff. People that are there, young people, have been there to make sure that the families are heard and taken care of. There's a group called the American Jewish Committee. They're in America, in Washington, D.C. They're all over the world, but they're there. Their staff, these people, made it possible for us to meet with Dems and Republicans by actually taking us, myself and hundreds of other people, and all of us to tell the story. And it goes back to why I wrote this book and why I'm here, to tell the truth about October 7th. So we had that incredible ability. Then being an American and being part of the American hostage families, Smadar, American citizen, Abigail, American, they were a smaller group, about 12, that had this ability to also work within the White House. Now think about it. Within a week of, I believe it's within a week of the October 7th, President Biden, first American president to show up in a war-torn Israel, showed up, showing love and support for Prime Minister Netanyahu and his leadership, but really, truly support for the Israeli, Jewish people, Arab people, everyone living in Israel. That was pretty impressive. Then, when we thought that, you know, the Iranians were going to do something to add on, or Hezbollah in the north, he sent 2 aircraft carriers, and he basically said, nobody mess with Israel. And that was the beginning of understanding. And what he also did at that point, you have to understand, I wasn't even sure, that was before he went, he reached out to American families on a Zoom call. We didn't even know Abigail, what her real status was. But people who were on that call said that the president spent over an hour hearing about their loved ones, who they had just learned were kidnapped. And from that moment on, we had this ability as the American hostage families to meet with his team. That included National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, Secretary of State Blinken, his special envoy for hostage negotiations, Brett McGurk, and other people from his cabinet and other leaders in his administration. And we met with him throughout his term a few times in the Oval Office. We met with Vice President Harris. We had this ability to meet with them pretty much monthly, many times in person, and other times via, Zoom. But this was a relationship that gave the administration the ability to hear what the American families were understanding. And remember, these were American-Israeli families for the most part. But to hear what they were understanding and to understand and honor the fact that Americans have a blue passport. And that blue passport means that we have the support of the White House and the American government. And I will just go to President Biden and the Qataris, and we can have discussions on all the geopoliticals, but it is because of President Biden's leadership and his team, and the Qataris, the Prime Minister, His Excellency, and his team, that Abigail and 105 women and children were released at the end of November 2023.
So share with us what it was like knowing that in the first round of hostage negotiations and the ceasefire negotiations that Abigail came home. Share with us your joy knowing that she was back home in Israel and that she was safe.
Yeah, so, we heard that there was a deal in the works like a week and a half before. But one of the things that I learned very early on from people like Spiha, who's the director of the hostages, Roger Karstens, until you see your loved one, you don't believe it. So even until, you started to see the news and I did not believe it until I saw her in my niece Liron's arms. But watching news, the first day she wasn't on the list. There were other women and children on that list. And I thought, okay, or at least we're starting. That was November 24th. That was Abigail's 4th birthday. She was still a hostage. The next day, she didn't make that list. Another 12 women and children. She wasn't on that list. The third day, she was on the list. But as well as I do, until that person with the list, the complications, when we heard that she had passed over the border, before she was in my niece's arms, I got a call, and my brother-in-law in Israel got a call from President Biden, directly from him. It was a short call, just saying, Abigail is back in Israel.
Wow. Wow.
And that was all we needed to know. And that was his job? I don't know, but he did it. And it was funny because afterwards I called Dory, and Dory called me, and we're like, I got a call from the president. Like, this was what he did. And this was how he treated the American families, and as many families as he could, but was the American president. And so that's how I knew Abigail was safe. But I want to add one thing. People say they're home. Yeah, she's home back in Israel. But her home, she can't go there. Their kibbutz is not a place where people can live. You saw Nir Oz.
Of course.
They're all in terrible. Nir Oz is one of the worst. But home is family, and she has beautiful aunt and uncle and beautiful grandparents and so many beautiful people, as do Michael and Amalia. But they're mommy and daddy. They don't have that. And that's what they live with the rest of their lives based on what happened to their family on October 7th.
How is Abigail after everything that she's experienced from that unbelievable evil day on October the 7th, then being kidnapped as a hostage by Hamas? How is she doing psychologically? How is she doing knowing all the trauma that she's been through? Because, her story is so reminiscent of so many children who went through the Holocaust over 80 years ago. It's a very similar story. So how is she doing, and how is she getting the support and the love and the care that she needs in order to recover from hell?
Yeah. Look, I wish that she was the only in some ways, because you'd say, okay, it was one. But there are hundreds of children that all went through hell. Michael and Amalia went through hell. Their cousins, who now are their siblings, they all live together. 29 hours for two 12-year-olds and a 10-year-old to be locked in a room where you can't speak, you can't eat, you can't do anything, and there's terrorists everywhere. The trauma, right now as I speak to you, and I hope when this airs, this will not be the case, there are little kids whose parents are still being held hostage. Like, the trauma doesn't end. But in Abigail's situation, which is, many people have said to me, it's similar to like the Anne Frank story of the Holocaust. It puts this child who was put into such a horrible, something that we can't understand situation. But the one thing that I will say about Abigail is that if you saw her tomorrow and you saw her playing with her friends and you saw her dancing and you just saw her zest for life, you would say, wow, that's a great, energetic, beautiful child. But then there's moments where, like, if there's a loud boom, the child goes like this because she remembers what it meant to have bombs falling. And if you talk to her, people say, well, what does she say? Do you ask? She's 5 years old now. You need to wait to hear what these children are going to say. And you need to wait for people to tell you. And in her case, she knows exactly that she was in Gaza. She knows that her parents' lives were taken. But what she also knows is that she gets to go to school. And she has love, and you talked about it in your prayer. She has support, she's protected. And she lives in a place where she now has 5 siblings. Her cousins and she and her brother and sister are this beautiful team. And my niece and nephew who are raising them are remarkable. So she has what we need for her to have a beautiful life. And so many of us that are also there as family to support. And look, she wakes up every day with an energy that gets everyone going. She's the youngest of the 6 kids, and she rules the roost. and I don't say that in a bad way. I just say that's who she is.
Amazing. And share with us your first encounter with her after being released. What was that like to have her in your arms? And can you tell us what your first conversation was with Abigail?
Yeah. So, I waited until after she had been released and, carefully checking in with my niece and the family because, like, for them also, this was so fragile. And Abigail stayed in a hospital where a lot of the hostages stay for a few days to be checked. And then I think going back to an earlier question, there's therapists that are working with all of these children, working with all of the people affected, the adults. And so it's a community it's an Israeli society that is there to take care of each other. But I waited, and like a few days later, I said to my niece, I'm just checking in. I want to make sure everything is okay. And she said, yes, all we're waiting for is to hear that you're coming. I was like on a plane, 2 days later. And so for me to walk in, and I was pretty stoic, and I kept it pretty good. At nights, I write about it in the book, I'd walk through New York City or Washington, D.C. and just bawl. I mean, like just holding it all together for important meetings and being there, but then just falling apart. And like, until Abigail was in my niece's arms, I can say I didn't really take a breath. I didn't really just go, okay. But then seeing her, and just seeing her a couple days after her 4th birthday, free, playing with other kids, running around after a soccer ball, drawing, hugging her. We don't take things for granted. I think most human beings are we understand how lucky or what we have. But when you have that, you realize you don't take it, you don't understand. And this is this child whose life is a miracle, and she is free.
It is a miracle, and it's extraordinary. I'm so pleased that Abigail came home and that you could embrace Abigail as well. But I think this touches on a wider point. When I visited Israel a year ago, this has been January, February of 2024, it was a different Israel. Yeah. And what I think surprised me the most was all the pictures of the Israeli hostages that were still in held in Gaza everywhere. You come out the airport and there's pictures as you walk down to passport control with the pictures of the hostages. You go to commercial billboards and normally they would have commercial adverts. They're the hostages. Everywhere it's about hostages. And then you kind of learn, unlike the way that Israel is being portrayed by our mainstream media, whether that's the BBC, CNN or Sky, what the Israelis care about the most is bringing their hostages home, because clearly what happened on October the 7th should never have happened, and the unthinkable did happen. Israel was invaded. The most secure border in the world, Eretz Crossing, was breached by Hamas, but the scale of it, as you mentioned, was horrific. Between 5,000 and 7,000 Hamas terrorists on the rampage. Took the IDF 6 or 7 hours, sometimes even longer, to get there. And of course, there will be an inquiry. There will be discussions of what went wrong on that day. But are you surprised about how this has united not only Israel as a nation, behind one goal, and that's to bring the hostages home, but how this is united world Jewry behind the hostages as well. I mean, the Jewish people now are one family, and it's the hostages that they care most about. And share with us the support you've had from members of the Jewish community in the United States, but also as you visit other countries like here in Britain as well.
Yeah, that's a lot to answer there.
Of course.
But I'll start with the noise and the protests, and I know you have them here in Britain, in the UK, and we have them in America and on college campuses. And people would say to me early on, what about those people that were writing on her face or tearing down pictures of 3-year-old like Abigail, or denying that it happened? And I always pitied those people because there's so much hate in their heart and so much lack of knowledge. They were just going with hate in their heart. They did not know the truth. And I couldn't fix that. But what I could talk about was the amount and the outpouring of love from so many different communities. And I talk about it here, the evangelical community. Early on, I met this woman named Penny Nance, and she was like embracing myself and other hostage families, helping us meet with leaders, mainly on the Republican side. But like to this day, she has been there checking in, doing what she can for the hostages, and she represents one person. I mean, how incredible. Driving in a taxi a couple months ago in New York, I'm driving down the street, I'm talking to somebody on the phone, I get to my location, I say thank you to the driver, and he says, God bless you. African-American gentleman driving the taxi, and I said, excuse me? And he said, God bless you, keep doing your work.
Wow.
God bless you. And those are just like 2 stories. I could sit here and tell you story after story for myself, and especially the American hostage families that I spent the majority of time with, but all the hostage families. You know, going to see the Pope, going to meet leaders. The problem, I think, has been is that there hasn't been an outpouring of noise from leaders saying, this is horrible, this is a terrorist attack. We have had it from the leadership in America. We have not heard it from all over the world. And that for hostage families, leaders who behind doors are saying it was a terror attack, but haven't gone out and said it, I will bring that up as that is a problem.
But it's beyond a terrorist attack, wasn't it? Because what we had was genocide, we had mass rapes, we had mutilation, we had babies burnt in ovens. I mean, this was...
There's no outrage. There's not the outrage from the people who would otherwise we would have expected, also from large women's organizations.
Absolute
large
silence.
Organizations like the Red Cross, large organizations like the UN, large governments, like small governments. The inability to speak out about this, like you said, invasion, terror attack, rape, burning, murder, it's the silence of so many or the inability to speak out, that is very painful. But I keep going back to the support and the love. And I go to it because, you know, you talk about those pictures that when you arrive at Ben Gurion Airport. Those pictures, I've seen them in shuls, I've seen them in churches, I've seen them online. And, you know, they're still there. We are about to hit 500 days. And there's over 70 people who are being held hostage. People can talk about how many are alive and how many are dead. With this last few that have come back, this last 13, 14, they have given us signs of life that no organization has given these families in almost 500 days. Yep. There's twins, the Berman twins, Ziv and Gali from Kibbutz Kfar Aza. This is the first time people said we saw them. They're alive. These are people, young 20s, mid-20s. I've been in DC with their brother. They were next door neighbors to my sister-in-law, Shlomit. This is family. And so, like, the quiet, but then when you hear they're alive, and you can all of a sudden say, they're alive. There's an American 20-year-old young man named Idan Alexander. I go to Shabbat dinner with his parents when I'm back in America. He's from Tenafly, New Jersey. They know he's alive. There's a father, another American, Sagi Dekelhen. His wife had their 3rd child while he's been a hostage. So I know these people, both the Israelis, the Americans. We need to all keep putting pressure to make sure they come home.
Can you just share with us, and this would have been nice for Abigail and yourself, but I saw an excellent CBN news report prior to doing this interview with you, and it's a really emotional picture of Joe Biden actually holding Abigail in the Oval Office in the White House. Share with us what her experience was like going to the White House and meeting the president and having those wonderful photo opportunities, and that experience for you, knowing that she's home, safe.
Look, first, I'm going to add the Christian evangelical community has been for myself and these hostage families so incredible.
Amazing.
That I don't want to miss this opportunity to just say thank you. And I know that no one wants to be thanked, and no one really feels that their thank yous are due until all the hostages are come home. But that has been something that you can't sort of wait to say. I can't wait to say. Going to the visit at the White House, to see this child who was held in a dark room with no food, with nothing, and to then see her running around the Oval Office, which represents to me, and I believe to most people, this bastion of freedom, this office of the President of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief, and to see her and her brother and sister and cousins, and they all brought him artwork, and I show some of the artwork in the book, and there's a picture of it, but to see the president receive their artwork and then talk to them about his loss and say, I understand the pain of losing family, and not to do anything but just tell these kids, I'm here, I get you. And then to see him walk them around and give them a tour and show them other pictures that he had received from children. Beautiful. And then at one point I picked Abigail up to take a picture with the president, and I put her standing on the Resolute desk, and I said, oh my God, excuse me, is this okay? And he goes, it's just fine. He put his arm around her. Then the other kids came, and he just took pictures. And there was nobody else from his staff there. He was alone. He was there as the host, being there with this family. And then he goes over to my niece Lerona and Tazoli. These two people have lost so much and are doing so much. And this was 6 months after the attack. Abigail was released. And he just went over and talked to them and heard their pain and just was with them. So you ask about Abigail, she thought it was Joe. She was 4 years old. She didn't understand, and I don't know how many children would understand that he is the president, what that means, or what you and I would understand. But what she understood was this man helped to bring her home. That she knew. And what this family and my niece and her husband knew was this man cared. And he, committed at that point, and he wasn't able to get it over the finish line, but he committed at that point. I'm going to do everything I can to bring home these hostages. And while it did not happen under his administration until the very end, with the push from President Trump coming in, I do believe that every day it was one of the first things that he worried about in the morning, and one of the last things he regretted he did not accomplish each day.
Thank you for sharing that. That's very special, and it also shows, I think, the empathy that President Joe Biden has as a person, as well as a president as well. It's fantastic news to have the hostages come home. But what are your thoughts on the way that they are paraded in the midst of these Hamas terrorists in Gaza, and also the fact that Hamas are using this as a kind of PR stunt?
It's horrible. It's terrible. There's not enough words. Look, when you see them, what we're forgetting in the midst of all that ceremony, these people were stolen, the majority of them in their pajamas, at 6:30, 7:30, 8:30 on a holiday Shabbat morning. Many of them, in this last round, there were young women who were left alone for 490 days in a tunnel by themselves. There were men who had shackles, and they did not learn to walk until they knew they were going to be released. We saw a few days ago, and I hope when this airs that we have more people, because no matter how horrible it is and the disgrace of what the Hamas are doing in this ceremony, which is disgusting, at least we have people home. Exactly. We have people safe. Yeah. But people being held with not even a piece of pita bread a day, I don't know. I don't know how world leaders and people around the world don't look at this and think, oh, this is just disgraceful. And we have been silent. But when you talk about like Hamas, what I want people to understand, and you asked about this, like, I've been to Doha, Qatar. I've been to the United Arab Emirates, to Dubai. I've seen over the last 30 years what they have built with money. They built beautiful, functioning cities. People have jobs, cars go, they're clean, people are living a life. You go and you see this ceremony, but you see that even before October 7th, the conditions that Hamas and leadership in Gaza had kept these people, 2 million people have been held under Hamas.
Exactly.
So when you ask about like that ceremony, and they're trying to be, at the end of the day, they've ruined life for their people. Doesn't matter how many posters they can put up, how many uniforms they can wear, how many machine guns they can show, how many new iPhones they can show, it's disgusting. To get people and give them a gift certificate saying thank you for being here, when the truth is they were kidnapped from their beds, their family and the people around them were murdered, and they're in tunnels being kept for 490 days. I can only keep going back to tell the truth of what happened and where we are and while these people are suffering, and just hope that the majority of people, no matter how good their propaganda is, understand that not only has Hamas done this to these over 250 people, but they've done it to all of their people. Their people are suffering.
Absolutely. And it's their actions that brought Israel's incursion into Gaza almost 3 weeks later in October. But I want to bring up an issue that at the same time as October the 7th, we've seen an unprecedented rise in Jew hatred around the world. And this was happening even before any Israeli soldier actually stepped over that border from Israel into Gaza. So share your thoughts on what you've seen of this pandemic of Jew hatred around the world and the demonization of Israel, and again the Jewish people being demonized, when we know that Israel is a beacon of light in the Middle East. The Jewish people are a people that love and embrace life and care passionately about humanity.
I'm going to go back to it with this lens of hostages. So I keep talking, I go into many rooms and I speak across the country, America. I've been here now for a few days speaking, and I have welcomed opportunities to speak with very many different kinds of people, Jewish but not Jewish, students, older people, community members. And a lot of times people will say, well, what about Iran? Okay, they're horrible. What about, and I'm like, let me just focus on right now the hostages. But let me say the following. On October 8th, like you said, all of a sudden there was this exponentially explosive anti-Semitism. But they were all watching Hamas terrorists GoPro, and the glee and happiness of terrorists, which are people that were coming into my family's home and murdering my niece and her husband and kidnapping their 3-year-old. And we talked about the other horrific, the rape, the burning babies, cutting people open. And they are showing it on GoPro cameras, and they are celebrating it. And we've seen it. It's out there.
Yeah, I've seen it. Yeah.
It's not going away. And that people are going to be sitting there and cheering that, or saying things against the Jewish people. I go to this moment of, I'm going to focus on getting these hostages back so that Hamas doesn't take these people's lives as well, as many as we can get back, and we need to get them all back. But I also say, after these people are back, I will keep telling the truth of October 7th, and other families will keep telling the truth of October 7th, and we will not let those people that are hateful, that have to have the narrative. And anti-Semitism has been here since the beginning of time, but I have found the Jewish people that I know and meet, they are ready to stand up and say enough. Your community, you're there with us.
100%.
You are there with us. And there is so much more strength in that than in hate.
Absolutely.
So for me today, talking with you, and please, when this airs, they should all be home. But if they are not, We all have to have one obligation, which is to doing everything we can to keep telling the truth, keep making sure that Prime Minister Netanyahu and Hamas make a deal. And I think, like you said, like, pray for all of them. Pray for President Trump to keep doing it, and his special envoy, Steve Witkoff, and his National Security Advisor now, Waltz, and head of SPIHA, Adam Bowler, like their team. Pray for them to keep going. Pray for Prime Minister Netanyahu. Pray for Hamas. Pray for the people. And keep doing this work, because we have to get them home.
Absolutely. We've got 2 minutes left of the program, Liz, and it's been remarkable having you here, and it's been an absolute pleasure to hear your story and hear Abigail's story, and a mixture of anger and hatred, but also jubilation, knowing that she's home and some of the other hostages are home. But practically, what steps would you recommend that our viewers could take to help bring the hostages home? Because I know that, for example, there isn't a day that doesn't go past where I'm personally not praying for the hostages. I've done so many programs highlighting the plight of the hostages to bring more awareness and telling Israel's narrative, which is a righteous narrative of why Israel had to destroy, go into Gaza and destroy Hamas, and how, you know, we embrace the fact that the Jewish people live and prosper because you are God's chosen people, and it's an honour to have you on the programme. 30 seconds.
30 seconds. First, I come from a place of love. I could right now come from a place of hate, but I come from a place of love. I want Abigail and all of the children to grow up in a world, the children living in Gaza, the children living in Israel, the children living here in the UK, children to grow up in a world that does not continue to have what happened on October 7th. There's no place, there's no time. But everybody that's watching and everybody that's listening, they have social media, they have a voice. And what I believe is that we need to keep telling the truth, not just Abigail's truth, but the other hostages that are out there. Absolutely. The truth that right now, as I speak to you, there's 75 people that need to be released. And keep putting out the truth and sharing it. And even the people that are dubious, keep giving them the stories, keep giving them the hope. And I believe that that is what we can keep doing. Right now, there is a God, but there are leaders, and we have to give them all of the power to do it. And what we as humans can do is, yes, we can pray, but we can write letters, but we can post on social media, and we can tell the truth.
Liz, I just want to say personally, it's been an absolute honour, also a privilege having you here on the Middle East Report. I want to say that we love you and we love all the hostages family, and we will not remain silent in the face of evil. We will pray, we will campaign till all the hostages come home. So I just want to thank you so much, and just to take away that our prayers and our love are with you and the rest of the families, and I'm so pleased that Abigail's come home. And I just want to thank you for watching this moving and remarkable interview today on the Middle East Report with Liz. Let's continue to keep Liz in our prayers, that she would have the strength, but also the rest of the hostages families that need our help, they need our love and our support so they can come home. So thank you for watching this week's edition of the Middle East Report.